Right, hello there. So, excuse me. Today is continuation of the pipe, the bubble pipe. So yesterday, or the previous video, if you're watching this after the fact, but in the previous video we made our mesh. We made where is the high-res version gone? Oh, there it is. We made a high-res version, and then we used that and the low-res to bake our normal map. So we did a lot of discussion about normal maps and a bit of discussion about some of the principles you want to be aware of when you are making your high res from a low res. So it's worth watching that just to get some tips and some background into creating normal maps for Studio. So now that we've got our pipes, let's just hide that, hide and hide. So now that we've got the pipe, what we're going to do today, or in this video, is setting the item up for Studio. So what we'll do is first just, I think what we'll probably do here is, what we'll do is just set the item up as a standard accessory item, just to make sure that everything's working. So we're testing essentially the mesh and being exported as an accessory or an attachment, because we're using the attachment tool for the toolkit. So we'll just do that initially, and then once we've checked that to make sure it works, what we'll then do is set up the skeleton right the head. Oh no, let's just use the thing. What? Oh, there's this. Where did that come from? Not sure why that was there. When did we put that there? Oh, it doesn't matter. So what we'll do is, once we've got that set up and tested, we'll then edit the armature so that we can add that extra bone that we were talking about previously, so that we have a target for our bubble effect that we're going to use with the bubble particle system. So let's do that first. Right. So we just selected head, set that up as the bone so that we could see the avatar, because you can't, without it, without a bone, we don't see the avatars. So what we need to do, generally speaking, is we can select any bone just so that when we start an attachment project, we can select any bone from the drop-down list just so that we can see an avatar. But when the time comes to set up the object correctly, we need to make sure that we delete this reference or remove it. So we click on the X. That will clear it, which will clear the skeleton, that will clear the mesh, so we know we're in the right sort of mode for this. And then using the eyedropper, we want to select the armature that we're going to attach. So this pipe is going to be attached to that armature. So using the eyedropper, just click on that, on the head bone, which is the bone that we'll be using. And that will set the head bone correctly as our object's parent. So if we can check this by hiding the armature, and what this should have done is dropped in a second, there it is, second armature. Not quite sure why that's not selected. Where is it? It shouldn't be down there. Why is it down there? Let's clear that. delete O3 master route. So we're going to use that armature. Set it up, but for some reason, is it adding it down at the bottom here? Yeah. Something weird is going on. What we should have is another armature in attachment export. Now, for some reason it's not dropping it in. Okay, so when this happens, so we'll do it live. When this happens, what we have to do then, new project. Oh, hang on, before we do that, let's just reload this. Reloading. Oh, it is renamed. That's okay. Right, so fix this. General. Don't save. Make sure nothing is selected. Toolkit. Attachment tool. Create a new attachment project. So this time we're going to select, using the eyedropper, the head bone. Oh, it looks like this is a bit of a bug because that shouldn't be down here. It should be up here where the head is. Oh look, there's an update. Let's try and see if we can update. .7.7. So that clicking that link opens the browser and the download page. 7.7. Right, so let's do this again. This could be a bug, which means that there's edit preferences. So this is how you install or override. Install, where is it? Downloads. 7.7. So that's the updated version. Install add-on. And it should. So if we type IMVU search 7.7, there we go. So okay, just restart Blender. Make sure that's working correctly. Let's try bubble pipe. Yeah, so attachment rig is down at the bottom. What should happen is that moves itself and orientates itself relative to the bone that's set as the target. So I'm not sure what's going on here. Nope, still down at the feet. Okay, so let's try. Setting the mesh up. That's right. It's when I haven't used this tool in a while actually. It's when you set up the mesh that the rig is moved into position. The attachment rig is moved into position. So yay for being rusty. So let's do that again for the third time, fourth time. So reload. Right, so if you had a different bone selected from the list, remove it, hide that. That's something we dropped in. Use the eyedropper. Click. Select the bone. That will set it in the list. And then what we want to do next is just select the mesh. Just want to position it where we need it to be first before we do this. Select the mesh and then just click Set Up Mesh. And that will move that attachment armature. Oh, it's not going to let us do that, so let's just use this. That will move the attachment armature. This is the one that's actually used by IMVU. That will move it to position, into position, to represent the bone of the avatar. But let's just save this because we can export that. That's all we really need to do to test this. So save as number 5. And then what we can do is just export. And that's it, exported. So IMVU Studio. New project. Male accessory. Empty male accessory. Derive. There's our avatar based on whatever settings we've got. And we're just going to import our FBX. So import FBX. Now this is going to be appended attachment. Now which one is it? Upper pipe 5. That's that one. Open. Oh, you know, we've forgotten to do something again. What we need to do, so previously we generated our normal map and saved it, but we also generated our diffuse texture, but we forgot to save that. We need to save this. So right now this is procedurally generated, so this doesn't exist. Well, except for inside Blender. So we need to make this real by saving it. Save as IPNG. That's okay. That will then associate it with the material. So this is now an actual image that's being referenced from wherever the image is saved on our hard drive, rather than just being procedural information. So generated texture. So now it's real. So now, if we export, we should get an FBX that references the two images. So that's the image, the pipe image, what we see, and the pipe normal map. Let's try that again. Import FBX. Bubble pipe 5. So there we go. Textures are too big. How big is the texture? It's 512 by 512. Oh, and it won't let us do it. Pattern's greyed out. Are those over 1 megabyte? They're PNGs, so they should be fine. So where are the accessories? So bubble pipe. Where did it save them to? Yeah, accessories. PNG. Okay, well let's try saving them as a different format then. I'm not quite sure what's going on there. Target raw. Save as image. Target raw. Save as image. So we should now have okay, this is weird. They're not appearing in the save location. Okay, that is very weird. I don't know what's going on. Too many files for starters. That's very weird. Image, save as, accessories 2.8. So it's Blender is showing that the file does exist because this is red. That means that we're going to override. Where is it? So it's there. And for some reason it's not showing in Windows Explorer or File Explorer or whatever it's called these days. Yeah, so entertain yourself whilst I try and figure out what's going on here. Accessories, Blender 2.8. I have never had this problem crop up before. So just done a search and it's found them, so I have no idea what was going on there. That's the two PNGs. That's the normal map. That's our diffuse. Let's just resave these. Export. We can do JPEG for the diffuse. Yeah, it's 512 by 512. That's acceptable within Studio, so I'm not sure what that error message was about. So let's just try this. Export. Type JPEG. And the normal map will save that as a PNG. So we don't want to introduce, if we use JPEG, we potentially introduce artifacts from the JPEG compression. So we want to use PNG, which doesn't have, lossless compression, whereas JPEGs are the opposite. The 512 by 512, that's okay, that's okay. That's okay. Don't see anything wrong with that. So export. PNG normal. I'm going to save over the top of the one that exists, which is what we're doing. Okay, so try that again. Import FBX. Texture too big. Pipe PNG. Oh, it is 1 megabyte. Okay, so what we can do here when this happens, so it's obviously referencing, because we're loading in an FBX that's come straight from Blender. Blender doesn't care about file sizes and none of this nonsense. So what we can do here is, obviously Studio is giving us a warning that the images that are associated with the mesh in Blender are too big. Well, not physically, their file size is too much. Computer says no, there's too much file data. So what we can do here is, we've got a preview of what's in the file, so we can skip this and go straight into, oh, it's, there we go, material. So we can go back through, once we skip that initial error message, we can go back and manually go through the process of importing. So skeleton, that's fine. Although, let's see if it's got the, no it doesn't. That's fine. 3 bones, because the mesh is considered a bone within the hierarchy of an FBX file. So that's okay. Don't need to do anything with these, so always leave those alone. The mesh ID, we can change that. For the male, it's 0. For the female avatar, it's 2. Right, override meshes. Next, pipe. So here we go. Now we can change images. So we want bubble pipe. Where the heck is that gone? Pipe. This is what happens when you have too many projects. Saved it as a JPEG. There it is. Honestly. Right, open. Normal map. What was that one called? Pipe normal. PNG. So pipe. There it is. Pipe normal. What we can do here as well is, so we right click. This is if you're using Windows. Properties. 131 kilobytes. So Blender is essentially exporting, when we turn off the compression for PNGs, Blender is essentially exporting almost raw data, but within the PNG format. So that's why the file size is bigger. Open. So now, why is it still not? Oh, this is going to be review. So we should have, this should be nulled because we've just updated the images. In fact, it's showing us 132 kilobytes. So we've still got this error message telling us that we're using a larger image. Let's see what happens when we import. All that faffing around, but we've got our pipe in place. So we know that at least works. So let's take a look at the materials. Yeah, material. So it's got our diffuse and our normal map. The pipe is where it needs to be. So that works. So this is why, I mean, this whole, however many minutes that's been, 20 minutes. Well, yeah, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. That's why you want to test your products before you do anything particularly significant to them. Just get something blocked out, or the mesh. In this case, we just got the mesh done and attached to the armature of the head, and just export it as a standard item. So we've not done anything special to the armature, which we're going to do next. But this is why you just do a test export, so that we can find out these issues where images are too big, either file size in terms of their being a 1 megabyte plus or whatever it is, or they're physically large images, so a 1024 by 1024 instead of being a 512 by 512. So we find all of that out in the earlier stages, so that we can now go back into Blender and finish off the project. So now that we have the attachment skeleton, what we can do is hide the head armature just to stop us from getting confused. So these are all the skeletons or the armatures. These are all individual armatures. We can hide the head, so all we have is the actual armature that's used for the accessory item. We're going to modify this now, so edit mode, and if we have problems selecting the bones, and I'll see if I remember which one it is. Yeah, what we can do is just switch into wireframe, and this will allow us to select the individual bones. So we've got attachment root and attachment node dot head. And what we want to do is in edit mode is just duplicate one of these bones, doesn't matter really which one, and move it into the bowl of the pipe. So we want the bottom, I think this is the bottom end at the bottom of the bowl. That's where our bubbles will emit from. So select a bone, armature, duplicate. That will create a duplicate and it'll be appended. Whoops. It will be appended the 00, well, we can't see it right now, but it'll be appended 0.001. What we want to do is move that into position at the bowl of our pipe. And because we duplicated this, it'll have an automatic association with the bone it was parented from, or copied from, I should say. And we can test this by quickly going to pose mode, selecting one of the parent bones. So that moves the pipe, and that will move everything else. So what we might want to do here is, as attachment node, so that's attachment root. So what we can do, edit mode, select the bone that we copied, go into, I think it's that one, bone properties. No, it's not that one. It's this one. Yep, that's bone properties. Relations. We want to change the parent from attachment root to attachment node. And what that will do is, so that's attachment node, that's attachment root. So before, when we moved one of the bones, it was only moving the mesh, whereas we want the bone to move as well. Not the bone, we want the bone and the mesh to move. What we can also do is edit mode, select the bone. Let's just call this bubble target. They've got the name appearing, bubble target. Back into object mode. So in object mode, the bone that we created will move because it's part of the armature object, but the mesh won't. because this has only got an armature modifier associated with it. It doesn't have a vertex, it's not parented. So it'll have a vertex group, is here, but it's not parented to the armature. So that's another thing to be aware of when you're working with the toolkit in a general sense, is the relationship that's created between the objects when we're linking them all up. Because the way that the toolkit works is that it's set up to produce a functional product for IMVU, not necessarily something that is conducive to working in Blender. So there's a difference. So if you were wanting to move this around as part of the skeleton, you'd have to parent the two together. So mesh, armature, then object, parent, object, and then down in the bottom when the parent menu appears, you finish the setting off, and that will allow the object to move with it. But generally speaking, you don't really need to do that for accessories because they are fixed. They have a fixed placement. Anyway, so let's save this. Whoops. So that was a bit of troubleshooting. Oh, actually what we can do to save that error popping up in Studio. So we're in shading workspace, we can edit the material. We're going to load in the pipe JPEG. So we're going to override the one that's there at the moment, which is just the PNG, but we'll use the JPEG. There it is. There it is. Oh, where's the JPEG? Oh, diffuse. There we go. Yeah, that's only 68 kilobytes. So select, open. Do the same with the PNG. Type normal, PNG, that one's 132. So select, we'll have to reset color space to non-color so that that renders correctly in Blender. Let's just save over the file and then export again, and what this will do is export this extra bone. It'll export that as part of the group. So export. That's number 6. The Studio. Let's create a new project. Accessories, mail accessory, derive. Import FBX. Number 6. Open. So now, no errors. That's good. Set up FBX. So now we've got 4 bones. So again, the mesh is considered a bone within the hierarchy, but we've actually got an extra bone in here now. So there are now 4 bones, 4 air quotes bones, 3 actual, 4, and 1. I was going to say metaphysical or metaphorical, but you know what I mean. So pipe. Set that to 0. Next. Images are okay. Next. Review. That's what it's going to bring in. Import. There is our pipe. What we can do is enable skeleton. And there is our extra bone. So we can see the connection to the head bone. So using the overlays as a useful tool to checking that our objects have appeared or they've been imported correctly into Studio. So now that we've got that, what we can do, let's just quickly save this. File, save as. Type 1. Set up a particle. So, particles, create a particle. We can rename this, so that's our particle. That doesn't do anything other than making it easy to see, because you can have multiple particles assigned to a particular object. Attachment root, that doesn't necessarily do anything in this particular instance. So what we can do is just enable this, so preview, and we will get our initial particles, and they're appearing all over the place. So here comes the fun part. Right, so we want it emitting from our origin of our bone. Right now, again, another overlay, enable particles overlay. That gives us a helper so that we can see what's actually being used as the target, and it looks like it's the head. So let's see if we can change that and see if it changes. It shouldn't, but yeah, it's still the head. But anyway, so now see if I can remember how we did this. So origin, sphere, box, cylinder, disc, sphere. I think it was this one, 0. Yeah. So what that does is it changes the origin, which is that widget that we saw. So this widget represents the origin of our particle. And right now the particles are appearing anywhere within that space. So we want it to be a specific point, so we can change the end size or the end scale, and that narrows it down to a specific point. There should be, I can't remember how, so let me just double check something. Root node, head. That's right. Let's just change that. Swap it back. Because what we should be seeing, so even though it's a bit finicky, the particle tool system, so even though we've got our bone here, we're not getting that showing up in the list. So what we should be able to do here, node, is open that list and it should list the bones of our armature. So we will have two. We've got attachment root, attachment node, and then bubble pipe, our bone, but it's not showing it. What we might have to do is just save this, close that, don't save, close that, reopen and see if it'll. And now we're missing the textures. This is crazy. This is one of the reasons why live streams are difficult. Because the viewer, you, dear viewer, are watching this expecting something coherent and cogent with respect to whatever is being done or whatever you're watching. But when problems like this crop up, you end up with a confusing mess because you might not encounter this problem. So if you're following on, if you're following this process, you may be wondering why this is happening if it's not happening to you. And it just makes these videos not completely useless, but relative to this being an exploration and explanation of doing something, it makes these incredibly useless, basically, for want of a better way of putting it. So let's try that again. It's an error in the way that the particle system tries to override the default material that's assigned to our object. I don't know why it does it, but what it's essentially doing is, so we've got our material. There's our material. So when it creates its new material, that new material for the particle system overrides the existing material for some peculiar reason. I have absolutely no idea why it does that. File, save as. So let's just save over pipe. Voice 2. Right, close. Let's just close Studio. Open that file. Now let's see if we can add our particle system without it overriding this existing material. Particle, bubble pipe, and just preview. Let's go back to our materials. So, okay. So what we may need to do in the interim, if this is a bug, is load in your FBX, get the FBX set up, do all of that first, save the project, close it, reopen it, and then add your particle. So let's see if that fixes this and we don't have any more issues. So 0. Let's also see if we have, and now we also have all the bones. That's very weird. Okay, so there is our bone target. That bubble target. That's the bone that we want. So if we watch, let's just enable skeleton and enable particles. If you watch where that's coming from at the moment, it's being spawned from the head. So what we should see is these particles shifting to our target. Preview. And there they are. So now all we have to do is fiddle with the options. Right, so lifetime. Actually, let's do first gravity. We want that to be 0. Want any gravity. So the gravity, so these things are basically being spawned in an arc like that because gravity is influencing their direction of travel. We want to null that, so essentially they just get spawned. So the direction that they are being spawned is basically this red arrow. So they're being spawned forward of the avatar, but gravity is influencing them. So if we disable gravity, preview that, they'll just spawn straight out. But we now want to change the orientation so they spawn upwards. And that's the direction. So change the Z to 1 and that to 0. Aha. Now, of course, we have to keep in mind that the orientation of the bone may not necessarily reflect what we would normally expect. So Z ordinarily, or Z, goes up. Y goes backwards, and X normally goes out to the side. What we might have to do, because of the bone's position and placement on this accessory, we might have to change. Is it going to be X? 0. Yeah, it's X. So keep that in mind when you're working with your particles, that your bone orientation may not necessarily align to the direction that the particles should be emitting. But always keep an eye on what this red directional arrow is doing. Right, so that's gravity disabled and our direction set. So now we can go back to the emission components and change the size of our objects and their behavior. Speed, slow that down. Let's just go with 0.1 and let's go with 0.5. So much slower, but there's tons of bubbles. So we want to reduce the number of bubbles. Oh, they also last for ages because lifetime. So if we reduce this, let's go with 0.5 to maybe 2. So that's 5 seconds to 10 seconds. We're reducing it down to half a second to 2 seconds. So now we want to reduce the size a bit more. Let's try 0.5. And 0.1. Yeah, that's about right. And then change the rate. So we're reducing the number of bubbles. Let's try 3. Yeah, that looks okay. So let's save this. File save as type 3. Then add our bubble material to the particle. So particle materials function exactly the same way as mesh materials. So we have our options. Let's see if we've got a bubble texture. Yes, we do. So bubble. It's a diffuse, opacity. Bubble opacity. The preview. So we might not be able to see this because we're using alpha test. So we can either adjust that down and we can see the bubbles, but whoops, because we're using alpha test, it's going to outline them in black depending on how we've done our images. So the images for these where are they? And searching through the assets using File Explorer. Too many files and projects. Right, so here we are. So actually it's a good job this. So this is why you don't want to save your normal maps as JPEGs. So this is a good example, even though this is completely, it's not, you know, this isn't a normal map, it's not going to be used as a normal map, blah, 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 blah. This is why you don't use JPEG for your normal maps, because this is artifacting that's introduced because of the way that JPEG compresses images. It does it in blocks. And these, if they're in a normal map, get interpreted as normalized data, which then causes problems within the normal map. So it can introduce issues into your normal map because, let's say for the sake of argument, these darker colors or the darker grey would be a darker blue, which is seen as structure, basically. Same with the lighter tones, that would be seen as structure. So what that looks like, so this little section here, so if we're looking at our normal map in profile, so if it was all blue, all one color, it would be flat. It would represent a flat surface. But these variations result in this in our normal map. This is what the normal map sees, essentially, when it's looking at these kinds of color or tonal variations. So this is why you want to use PNG, lossless compression, if you're going to compress, PNG when you save your normal maps and not JPEGs. So that's a happy little sort of accident loading these in. But these are the bubble images. And if we use alpha test, so alpha test is clipping based on black and grey or white or whatever it is. But if we're clipping, this is our alpha mask, but if our actual image is just another copy of the same image, because of the way that alpha works, what we're going to end up with is a black halo or whatever colour the background happens to be. It could be blue, green, doesn't matter. We'll end up with a halo around our object where alpha can't determine, well, it can determine, but the alpha basically works on black or white, solid grey. So these variations, it doesn't know what to do with those from the point of view of how it filters and makes those transparent. So in this instance, what it would end up doing is creating a halo around our object, around our image, based on that difference between black and, well, this lighter grey colour. So what we want to do then in these instances is if changing the threshold doesn't fix that, let's see if we can get a, so if it doesn't fix that halo around our object, we can either change the diffuse so that it's just solid grey. Let's see if we've got a solid grey. Don't think. Oh, there we go. We'll use that one. Come on, bubble. Right, so got a halo around there because our original diffuse has that black background which isn't being clipped correctly. So we can solve that by either replacing the diffuse with a solid image or a solid colour. So now we've got rid of that halo, or we just flip to change the mode to composite. But if we use composite, it makes the bubbles transparent. So if you want that, that's what you would do. If you don't want that, you want solid particles, use alpha test, but make sure you change the diffuse color to something that's solid. Let's go with composite. Because there's one last thing that we can do. Let's just save this file. Save as. And this is number 4. Backing particles. This is notwithstanding any of the special effects here. The material, backing particles. There is one thing we can do, one other thing. So down here in evolution, so when the particles spawn, they actually change. So they kind of spawn in a dark tone and evolve into a lighter tone, because the evolution is set to spawn as a dark colour and evolve to a white colour. Well, it's a tinting, about an influence. So we can change that by clicking on. There is actually a sample box there, but because it's the same colour as the interface, it's difficult to see. But clicking on this area will open up the sample box, and we can change alpha to white. If we preview that, all the bubbles erupt the same tonal value. What we can also do here is change the scale over time. So right now we've got 1 to 1, so they are same size. When they are spawned, their size remains the same all the way through their lifespan. What we can do here, change that so that they can, in this case, so the bubbles appear to pop because they expand and then disappear. And we can play around with the evolution a little bit by adding another step. So we click on the plus. And we can play around with this popping effect. Whoops. Double click. So we've got 0, which is start, 0.5, which is half a second, and then 1 second. Got half a second. They're all the same size. And then they pop. Play with that even more. So let's go with 0.75 a second. And we can make them pop. So there are things we can do to our particles after they've spawned. So it's not just a question of spawning them, you know, as a random size. We can then do even more to them after the fact. So these look like popping bubbles. And if we wanted to, we could animate them, but we don't have anything to animate just at the moment. So let's go back to, let's just double check. That's okay. Then let's go back to the materials. And let's enable, let's try self-illuminate. That won't really do much in this particular room. Let's add emission. Enable emission. Turn that value down a little bit because it blows it out. I have to change the room, but we can see already inventory, rooms. Where's he gone? Oh. Get glowing orbs of bubbles. Does iridescence work? No. Does that need a shininess map? I can't remember off the top of my head. Let's try it anyway. Yes, it does. Doesn't really seem to like it with particles. But of course, if this was smoke, you could obviously change your opacity to be a smoke styled pattern, and then just changing all the settings, we get smoke. Let's disable emission. That doesn't really do anything. Effective. But that is our bubble pipe with a particle effect. obviously you can change your bubble's appearance by what your texture looks like, and your opacity. So the opacity is really the thing that defines what the bubble actually looks like. All these other effects are literally just that. They're after effects. So it'll make it glow, be more transparent, or whatever it is, whatever the setting does. But the primary defining characteristics of the bubble are your opacity map and your diffuse and what those look like. But that is our bubble pipe using a custom bone on an armature. So this is an accessory item or attachment item that has a custom bone added to it so that we can have a specific target for our particle system to emit from the bowl of our pipe that's in the avatar's mouth. So that is our bubble pipe. Let's just save this again. File, save as. So remember, just to recap, when you are importing your accessory and it's going to be using a particle effect, make sure to just set up the mesh initially. Just import the mesh, get that set up, make sure your materials are all set up and you've got the right sort of effect that you want in terms of, whether it's shininess or self-illuminating or whatever you've got listed or want to have. Save the project. You might then need to close the file, close the project and reopen it before you add your particle system to it. So if you have trouble adding a particle and it's overriding or messing up your materials, because if you have more than one material, it might override one but not all of them. If that happens, just restart the project, rebuild it, save the basic mesh, basic accessory item, just save that, close the project, reopen, and then add your particle system. And that should get round any problems that occur from using or wanting to add a particle to an item. And it might be that it does, as far as I've tested it, it kind of does that with all particle-based products. But that is it. That is our product. And I might put these up, the files, obviously not the studio file, but the Blender files, I'll make them available for download and for use. But that's it. That's our bubble pipe. Well, one thing, if you can do this before or after, it doesn't really matter, but if we want to position the pipe in a way that, let's say, off kilter, like so, if we want the pipe to be there, we can either do that after the fact we've set up the armature, in which case we would then need to move the bone into position. And don't forget to orientate it relative to the pipe as well. So we can do that after the fact, or we can position the pipe first, set up the base armature, and then add the bone afterwards. So we can do either or. But that is our bubble pipe made in Blender and using particle effect in the studio. So we'll call it quits there and get this written up with the files available. And we shall see you on the next stream, whenever that is. Hopefully not another 6 months. Right, bye for now.